The Day of the Rope by Devon. Chapter 10. There's something about him that I don't trust, Jacob said, leaning back in his chair. Jacob was sitting at a large conference table on the 63rd floor of the Silverman and Malone building, next to his mentor and the owner of the Manhattan high-rise, Eli Silverman. Jacob had worked for Silverman for over 25 years and had great respect for the man that had tripled the size of his empire over the last few decades. He had done it by being ruthless with all his competition and having incredible instincts. Although, to be perfectly fair, many of his investments, which included everything from commodities to world leaders that seemed to have been made by a man that could see the future, had in reality been the work of a man who dictated the future. More precisely, Eli was allowed by families that really dictated the future to manage the Americans. That said, they had been pleased with his efficiency and rewarded him with a large measure of autonomy when it came to operations in this part of the hemisphere. Jacob had learned at an early age how the world really worked, and right now it worked however Eli told it to work, or at least it had. Ever since the total disaster last year that was the presidential election, Jacob's faith in Eli had suffered a blow. He was worried that the families in Europe and elsewhere might also be questioning their faith in Mr. Silverman. In the meantime, Jacob would have to be extremely careful. He didn't like second-guessing his mentor, but something about this Wayne Thomas didn't sit well with him. What's not to trust? Look at him. He's like an all-American boy. You look up to the poster child in the dictionary. You look up poster child in the dictionary, and that's him. That's who you see. This is a gift. The natives are getting more and more restless, Jacob, and they love him. He's good on camera, and he has perfect opportunity to turn this friend of his into a martyr that would have been bad. But he didn't do that, Jacob. Not yet, but he could. Yes, he could. It's better we take control of this now before he figures that out, Eli had said. Eli's voice was energetic and gravely. He was well into his 70s, but now had put on a significant amount of weight in his old age, and now his stretched, wrinkled skin gave him the appearance of a younger man with a rare disease that had prematurely aged him. He wore a suit that cost more than most people's cars, but because of this oddly shaped and lumpy body, the suit appeared as ill-fitting as his skin. He jabbed his plump yet inexplicably gnarled fingers at the image of Wayne Thomas that was displayed on Jacob's laptop. He'll come cheap, too. You can tell that by looking at him. Never had nothing, won't ever have nothing. That boy will jump, Jacob. Jacob shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He never liked to go against Eli's instincts, but he also trusted his own. Our people still don't know who was behind the shooting. We just know it wasn't our people, Jacob said. What? So what? They're all our people. I told you that those Anifas brats were getting too enthusiastic. They weren't supposed to start this kind of stuff until we were ready, Jacob. You think we're ready? You know how ready we are? We're not ready, Jacob. It's going to take more time. This isn't how things were supposed to happen, so we need more time. This kid will give us more time, Eli said as his jowls jiggled about. Jacob frowned silently. What, you think this is a trick? You think that this kid has some kind of plan, Jacob? You're being paranoid. Everyone is being so paranoid. After Ehrenberg, I don't blame you. But fear makes people make mistakes. What's the news with Ehrenberg anyway? Was he mixed up in something he didn't tell us about? Eli asked. We don't think so. Langley has their heads up their asses, but our friends in Tel Aviv found a video. A video? How can there be a video? The stupid fuck made a video of himself? No, he isn't that stupid. How do we know that some rogue spooks didn't make this video? You say they have their heads up their asses. Maybe they don't, Eli said. We think it might be worse than that. We think maybe Ehrenberg might have wired his place up. Eli frowned and tapped his finger on the table. Show it to me. Jacob minimized the image of Wayne Thomas that had been on his screen and opened up the encrypted folder containing his more sensitive files. After a few clicks, a video window opened up, and the two watched there in silence for a moment. He didn't make this. That's his place he has in Eli scratched his head trying to remember. Maryland, said Jacob. Yes, I recognize that stupid fucking painting on the wall. He didn't make this. Not unless he had the place wired up recently. This is no good, Jacob. Did our guys do a cleanup before the feds showed up? Eli's tone was dangerous. He wanted someone to blame. Yes. And Eli, we can't be certain that Ehrenberg didn't make the video or that there aren't more. We do regular sweeps, and the last time we checked his place in Maryland was about 6 months ago. The video first appeared on the internet 2 months ago. When the cleaners ran a sweep, they didn't find any cameras, but they found pinholes and they found a few other possible areas that might have had cameras. Tel Aviv scrubbed the video off the dark web, and the bots are keeping an eye out for it if someone with a local copy connects it to the web. It's hard to know how many copies there might be out there, or if there might be more. The date on this file suggests that the video was made a few weeks before it surfaced, but that's all we know right now. This is no good, Jacob, Eli said, leaning back in his chair. Tel Aviv said they ran the video through an AI program, along with images from the other locations where there might have been cameras. If another video appears, it will get flagged and scrubbed automatically, and we'll be able to track the source, Jacob said. Eli was no fool, but he was from a time before the internet, and sometimes had trouble grasping the problems related to this new information age. You think this could be Alice and her people? They've pulled shit like this before, Eli said, frowning. Alice Green had been the candidate that Eli had supported for president, or rather, she was the candidate they had chosen for president. His family, at the behest of the families in Europe, had succeeded in their hostile takeover of the American political system nearly 50 years ago. Not that the Americans ever really had a say in who occupied the Oval Office. His family had simply wrestled control from the WASPs that had been calling the shots the previous 50 years, and restored the power where it rightfully belonged. It had been a messy affair, and the WASPs hadn't gone down without a fight, but after some clever maneuvering and surgical bloodletting, things had been settled. The matter had been overseen by Eli's father and dictated, as all things were, by the families in Europe. The last few decades had shown that the WASPs had learned to play ball, and the things had been running smoothly. He had perfected the system. Deals were made well in advance. Everyone who mattered was in agreement that the people, if left to their own devices, would destroy themselves and take those that mattered down with them. This was unacceptable to everyone, especially the families in Europe. The families who, to Eli's resentment, really called the shots. Eli thought they had misjudged the changing attitude of the American people, and he had been right. The families in Europe still blamed him, and now it was up to him to clean up the mess. He wasn't worried about the dark horse candidate, that had trounced Alice in the election. He owned most of the cabinet and had managed to get most of the appointees he needed in place. He was confident that this was merely an unfortunate setback in a long line of setbacks that he had rolled right over with the might of his benefactors, and the collusion of the elites nestled under their wings. What worried him was that the world was changing faster with each passing year, and some of his peers, even those he had always been able to depend on, were proving slow to adapt to the changes. The internet had made many of their tried and true social engineering tactics ineffective. They owned Silicon Valley just as sure as they owned Washington, but they'd been unable to wrangle the adequately suppress the free flow of information. Certainly they had ways of suppressing undesirable voices, but these undesirables were getting clever, and the old institutional media had been utterly incompetent. The people were playing outside of the sandbox like unruly children trampling all over his delicate garden. The narrative had split into unmanageable fragments. People like this Wayne Thomas were beginning to have more influence than the approved thought leaders. People like this Wayne Thomas had told people to vote for the other candidate, and the people had listened. They had overplayed their hand. They had been overconfident, and now their soft underbelly was exposed. They had to pacify the people and buy some time so they could regroup and then define a new monster to frighten their children back into their parents' arms. Then they must punish the children. Eli looked at Jacob and said, "Find out if this is Alice. Let her know this is unacceptable. We can't be having this kind of thing, Jacob. She is of no more use to us. I would burn her as a sacrifice in an instant. That would oil some of those squeaky wheels, but she would take down too many with her. Maybe she's not so certain of this. Make her wonder." Jacob nodded and asked, "Wayne Thomas? You say you don't trust him. Do what you do, Jacob. If he can't be trusted, make him go away. The kindling is very dry, and he is holding a match, but I also think he is holding a glass of water. Do what you do, Jacob. I'll leave this to you, but I say he is useful to us," Eli said. Jacob knew that meant what Eli wanted Wayne. Jacob knew that meant that Eli wanted Wayne, and that he should stop expressing doubt about his superior's intuition. He nodded and left the boardroom, then began making necessary calls to inquire of Eli's new pet. End of chapter 10.